الطب السوري.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As we mentioned earlier in the beginning of this edition of The Breakfast Show, we'll be talking about the ancient Egyptian language that opened the way for understanding the secrets of the ancient Egyptian civilization. To know more, we're very much delighted to have with us Mr. Yasser Kamel, Egyptologist and writer. Good morning to you, Yasser.
Good morning. Nice seeing you.
Good morning, Mr. Yasser. Mr. Yasser, to start with, what language did the ancient Egyptians speak?
Well, the ancient Egyptians spoke their divine language, or the God's language, as he named. And even if we call the hieroglyphics, or the hieratic, the demotic, these are just modern, relatively modern names. And each of them was created by Greek historians to refer to the significance of the language. The official form of the writing, they call the hieroglyphics, which mean the divine language. The second is the cursive, called the hieratic, which is after the hierarchy, which the priests and religious texts were written in cursive hieroglyphics like that. Third one, demotic, from demo, which is locals, like such as democracy. So the writing that locals could afford to write, which does not need by nature a skill or a talent. The official hieroglyphics looks like newspaper Arabic, requires certain calligraphy, certain size, certain skill, especially if it's written by hand. If I compare to the writing of the Quran, for example, requires a professional scribe to write it down by hand, in comparison with the shorthand of any language. So the demotic was like that. As maybe logic to say, as Egyptian civilization was African, definitely African, born in Africa, survived, evolved, developed in Africa. The nature was a source of inspiration for the hieroglyphics. The birds, snakes, the viper, the beetles, most of the generous nature had inspired the hieroglyphics. The various vocabulary, various pictograms. Hieroglyphic by nature, or the ancient Egyptian language in general, has two main features. A part of it is just simple as pictures, we call pictogram, which allow readers to understand, and even if they could not remember how to pronounce. That leads me to the point that maybe the purpose of the hieroglyphics is to live longer than any alphabet could do. So that maybe explains why the Egyptian language remained in use from prehistory till the Roman Empire.
But it was based on sound, Yasser?
Definitely the way language was invented was phonetics. I mean, the phonogram was first. And before the man to develop a skill to write. So it's difficult to assume the language, all languages were born as written. They were born as spoken. So the hieroglyphic was spoken first, then, which we have no documents about this. But that's the logic. Then secondly, it was written. And there is no doubt that the north of Egypt is the source of this language, based on hieroglyphic texts. And very common title given to scribes to be the northern bearers of the seals, or the seal bearer of the north. So if you have a stamp or the seal of the government, that means you can read and write. So the north of Egypt, or the lower Egypt, had invented papers. Their symbol was the papyrus, and no doubt the language evolved in the north first. In the proto-hieroglyphics, the pictures were complicated. Those characters were just pictures with many strokes. Then I personally believe that after Egypt became united by the efforts of Minos, after Memphis became the capital, the southerners had to learn to understand and read the language. So the alphabet was created to join and combine the word itself. So the word became a compound of a picture and a phonetic. The phonetic is a phonogram, which are the birds you see, the ducks, the repeatable.
Yes, you could see different types of birds.
Correct.
And they all refer to the sound A, for example, or
That's
A.
right. So before that, there was no need to create the character, or the alphabet A or A, because the native Northerners, they had no problem to read it. But once Egypt became united, the North and South had to share the same language. And the two sides each had to benefit from this. The North had offered the papyrus, the language, the science. The southern part of Egypt offered the army, the protection, and their own skill of keeping the nature safe, The lotus, for example, which the south of Egypt was famous to grow, it's logically was grown by them in the Nile on purpose to keep the river clean and allow fish to breed, allow parasites or kill parasites, as countries like China is doing, bringing lotus to the rivers, keep the river clean. So the stagnant marshes that the flood would create in south of Egypt, based on the flood comes from the south first, would be a problem if the lotus was. So I'm not trying to deny the southern part of Egypt advancements, but I'm referring to the hieroglyphics evolved in the north, then globalized around Egypt. If you spoke the language for 5,000 years, no other language could survive as long as this. Being a picture, you don't need somebody to stay in between.
We can see one.
This is the god of writing, Ibis. The Ibis god, Tot, and he's holding a brush, and the Egyptian mythology used to say, or referred, that he would write the history of the royal family on a reed or a bamboo.
Yeah.
And on the segments of that bamboo and reed would write the dynasty of the pharaoh and the names of the royal family members. And I believe, and this is based on what we see, that the Egyptian language was written first on materials than papyrus, including the segments of the reed, segments of the bamboo, then much later on linen threads and knots of linen.
Yes.
And what's that, Yasser? What's that picture?
See the remaining of a pottery. That's a pottery. Yeah, we wrote on pottery too. The early start of hieroglyphics went through writing on bones, writing on pottery, writing on
And solid material.
exactly, and the much easier to write on those canes or reeds, freshwater reeds, until they produced the papers. So the papers helped them very much because the papyrus they invented, it kept going against time, against decay, against bacteria, against fungi, in a magical way. We failed to know any reason nature had given, what kind of protection the nature offered the papyrus to survive that long.
Yes, and speaking of surviving, I understand that some spoken ancient Egyptian language is still used by Egyptians until this very modern day. And like Umbu, for example, or so many vocab, so many words I have seen that date back to ancient Egyptian
Absolutely.
times.
Our slang still contain a lot of Arabic, a lot of what we think Arabic, but once you compare it to the correct Arabic language, it's original hieroglyphics.
Yes.
Like calling a lady Set. This is the ancient name for a woman.
Yes.
If you say Hamati or Hamaya, you say it's after Hemet. Hemet means lady, like mother-in-law.
Yes.
So we have a lot of the crocodile, Mesah, in hieroglyphics, Timsah in Arabic. Of course, the Arabs had no crocodiles. The crocodiles would never live in the Sahara. So, I mean, a lot of our spoken.
And that's amazing for some words to survive 7,000 years and still be used until today.
Batatak, this for example, it means like your meat and your bone, or like I eat you all. It's all these, there's no way that the Arabic. So it's not, we should be proud of our identity, we should be proud of our history, and we should not deny that we are Egyptians. After all, Egyptians, no matter language, we respect all languages, but we are one nation and we are all Egyptians.
Could you please, Yasser, shed light on both the Demotic and the Coptic languages?
The Coptic, Demotic, it was an attempt to make everybody, it made an attempt to make a handy language for everybody. I mean, if the scribe is required to do a hieroglyphic or cursive, hieroglyphic, which is hieratic, we need something simple for ordinary people to make business, to fill contracts, for ordinary matters of life. The Coptic is the last form the ancient Egyptian language took, an attempt to keep it against the wish of the Roman Empire to stop. The Roman Empire made a rule that you should not practice or speak or write any more this hieroglyphics, that you would look like conspiring against them. They felt that you should not use it because you may conspire against the Roman Empire. So the ancient Egyptians decided to be smart and turn phonetically their spoken language into alphabet, all of it, totally alphabet.
Yes.
It's not like partly alphabet, partly pictogram. No, it became totally alphabet. And it was so logic to borrow the Greek alphabet
Yes.
with a little bit of hieroglyphic characters and combined them, mixed them, and made the Coptic. The Coptic held the hieroglyphic to remain, and that's the reason we can pronounce some of it. And once Jean-Francois Champollion wanted to decipher the hieroglyphics on the Rosetta Stone, he was advised to see the church and try to learn the Coptic first. Yes. And the Coptic still practice in our Coptic church till today. So the Coptic sounds like a soft hieroglyphic pronunciation. Like, for example, if I would say kha, it would be softer kha. The pronunciation, however, studying the Coptic is not accurate to 99 or 100%. Yes. Because shifting from tones, which the hieroglyphic character used to have, into alphabet, make you uncertain. Was it A? Was it A?
Exactly.
How would you know? So that's the reason if you ask me how much we are correct in our pronunciation of hieroglyphics, I would say 85%.
Yes.
We were lucky that once the Rosetta Stone discovered and had Greek texts for the first time, they could compare between the Greek and the hieroglyphics in the names. When Ptolemy V was mentioned in the Rosetta Stone, to thank him for being generous, being kind, they repeated the story with his name and Cleopatra in Greek language. So Jean-Francois Champollion thought he could trust that the Greek text mentions Cleopatra and Ptolemy, which are found in the hieroglyphics with frames, which the French call cartouche. And so the names, Western names, were the best key to be accurate, sort of reading the of the hieroglyphics.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Ptolemy, first letters P, second is T, CL, so we can tell.
Yes, we are seeing here another photo with
So we
writing.
this is another stage once we wrote our labels over ivory, and those labels were attached to jars the archaic kings owned. And some of them were informative, some of them were filled with history of the country.
Yes.
Some have referred to the unification, some have referred to the science. One of them in the museum showed an early surgery. Surgeons at that time in archaic history seemed to know how to save a life of somebody had choking took place in the esophagus or the throat.
Okay.
So they had to cut through and save his life.
Yeah.
I have a question now. Did the ancient Egyptians have dialect? Speaking of language, because in any country, especially in Egypt here, we have, for example, the people in Alexandria, they have their own dialect. Suez, the cities having their own dialect. In Upper Egypt, they have their own dialect. So was that the situation back in ancient Egypt?
Completely. We were 42 states, and each state has a slang. Then those people in a slang, they may pronounce sometimes totally different. The only way they are united is they could read the pictogram, the pictures. I mean, the hieroglyphic standard pictures are comprehended by everybody. And once they added the alphabet later on, they wanted to unify a pronunciation. But the purpose of the hieroglyphics is not to stick to the pronunciation, stick to the meaning. You should understand that, for example, verb give, di. Egyptians today say idini. Idini, this is di. We think it should be pronounced di. It could be idi. Because we still say idi, ni. Ni is N, mean give me.
Yes.
So the hieroglyphic D is a human arm holding a piece of cake, bread, and you are going forward with your right arm. So verb visually means give me.
Yes, okay.
So the modern Egyptologists think it's D only, but Egyptians say it. So properly, it's not D. It has something before the D. So it's not straight D.
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to say. We have no choice because we were translated from in hieroglyphic through the French till the Arabic. I mean, Jean-Francois Champollion, he compared what he believed the pronunciation based on his long language, and the French by nature never had characters, had alphabet only.
Yes.
So let's say we're 85% correct. If one day we find an ancient Egyptian alive,
Yes.
he will struggle a little bit.
Definitely interesting. I'd like to thank you very much, Yasser Kamel,
Thanks a lot.
Egyptologist and author. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us today in this edition of The Breakfast Show, brought to you by my dear colleague, Mr. Rabia, myself, Helen Hamalawi, both signing off and wishing you a very good day.